Me, I can hear you. Yeah, I need to go and hide now, Marta. I need to go and hide. Bye-bye.
That was the voice of Sasha Vakalina, Euronews' Ukraine correspondent, on the 24th of February 2022 at 7 a.m. Sasha was about to go live on Euronews' morning show when she was forced to run for safety as Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began. 4 years on, the war is still ongoing, with no end in sight. Welcome to Brussels, My Love, the podcast, with me, Maeve McMahon. For this special edition on the 4-year mark, I'm joined this week by our very own Sasha Vakalina. I'm also joined by Marta Barandia, the founding president of Promote Ukraine, and also Katharina Eschermann, the head of EU and international politics at Heinrich Böll Stiftung, the EU. Welcome.
Hi.
Lovely to have you all here. It's nice to have a female panel, especially just before Women's Day, so you're all very welcome. But Sasha, let's start with you. So take us back to that morning. You were just about to prepare to do your live. Tell us about those very moments.
Absolutely. These were the very first hours of Russia's full-scale invasion. On a side note, you can ask any Ukrainian, no matter where they were in Ukraine or outside of Ukraine, and they will remember moment by moment where they were and what they were doing the moment Russia started its full-scale invasion. This is an absolute, that's how it is for everybody. I was in Kyiv for reporting. I arrived a week before the beginning of the full-scale invasion. These were the days, as you remember, when the Western intelligence agencies were warning that Russia might invade, and we were given few dates. There were the dates floated. It was the 16th of February, the 22nd of February, and then the 24th. So the 16th of February, nothing. The 22nd of February, nothing. So there was a little bit of, the third one would materialize. Until about 3 o'clock in the morning when I woke up with a friend of mine who is actually in the armed forces of Ukraine, calling me in the middle of the night saying, "Wake up, the war has started." The reporting started almost immediately, but then, it's a continuous, obviously, breaking news situation for any journalist on the ground. The video, the sound, which we just heard, that's about 7 in the morning. These were the very first air raid sirens on Maidan in the center of Kyiv. And that's another thing. Nowadays, for 4 years, there were all, what did we, it was 4,000 hours of air raid alerts on average, because it depends, of course, on the region, on the city, but on average, 4,000. Back in the day, you're not that familiar with the sound either. And that's the first time you hear the air raid sirens on Maidan. That's the first time you hear very loud explosions. You hear the bombardment super close. And that was the first time I heard fighter jets flying very low above my head. So this was the moment when I had to cut. This wasn't my first live for the show. This was already, I was already reporting for a few hours. But that was the first time I had to cut it because I did not feel safe enough to continue.
A moment that you will, of course, never forget. Martha, I'm sure you remember as well where you were and how that moment was for you.
Oh, definitely. I was not even in Europe when it happened, but I received a message, probably just minutes after it started. A friend of mine who lived in Brussels, she told me, she sent a message saying, Marta, put on the news. And the irony was that I didn't have proper internet to even put the news, but I just started looking at what was happening through. I could not watch the videos, but I could see the text, and I saw that it started. And from that moment on, I was just sitting for maybe 8 hours, not moving anywhere, just keep on charging my phone. I didn't even go to toilet because I didn't have, I was not feeling that I needed to. I didn't drink water. I was arranging demonstration. There were 3 demonstrations on that day in Brussels. I was putting together all the people I knew for the help, and people were contacting me because before the invasion, 10 days before the invasion, 5 days before the invasion, even 4 days before the invasion, I was organizing manifestations, demonstrations near the Russian mission to the EU, near the European Parliament. There were 4 demonstrations in 10 days before the invasion. We activists, we knew that something was going to happen. We asked Brussels bubble to pay attention to this. We also published a journal 1 month before the invasion saying that curb the attack. It called curb the attack. So we were aware. And at that moment when it started happening, I couldn't believe. Actually, this was like, I knew, but I couldn't believe that it was really, it was a reality. At my organization, we were 5 people before the full-scale invasion, 5 people who were organizing all these demonstrations before the invasion. But 24 hours afterwards, we were 150 people whom we didn't know who they are. They just came together and started helping each other.
Because your organization has been active for many more years before, right?
8
Since
years,
2014.
Yes,
of
since
course.
Russia occupied Crimea, yes.
Yeah. And of course, you mentioned the Brussels bubble. I mean, this was also quite a shock for the EU establishment and EU leaders. I think, Katerina, you were in Berlin at the time.
I was actually on the day of the outbreak of the full-scale invasion. I was supposed to talk to the Green Parliamentary Group about joining them as a senior foreign policy advisor. Obviously, we postponed that interview, but I ended up working for them afterwards. And one of the first things we did was draft the resolution that allowed Germany to send heavy weapons to Ukraine.
Interesting to see how things have changed.
Can I just cut in here? Because I know that you also remember how you got the news. Because there are so many journalists in Ukraine and, outside of Ukraine who have been covering tirelessly Russia's full-scale invasion. And we talked the other day, Maeve, when how you found out when you were in Brussels.
I found out when I was in Brussels, yeah. I was literally, my bags were packed. I was on my way to Germany to spend the weekend with my husband and my family. And of course, the news came in around 5 a.m, the news that we had been potentially reporting about for weeks, because a few weeks before that, I'd sat down with Antony Blinken, the former US Secretary of State at NATO, and looked him in the eye and said, I know you have intelligence. We can see the build-up. What are you doing about it? And he said, well, we know it's happening, but he didn't really know what they were doing about it. And then the worst case scenario did happen on that morning of the 24th. And of course, I sent my family packing to Germany for the weekend and I came to work. And just like Sasha, our whole newsroom was then in breaking news mode reporting on the story. And the reality is 4 years later, the war is still ongoing. Martha, did you know that it would last this long?
Probably so. It's very hard to say now, looking into the past. But as the war started in 2014, let's not forget that. The full-scale invasion started in 2022. But already back in 2014, 15, 16, I saw how Europe was reacting. I saw how people were reacting. And I saw when our people, when our activists, we came out to the streets and started asking, close our skies, started asking sanctions for Russia, weapons for Ukraine. And we saw how slowly it was all moving. Comparing to the escalation, to the high escalation, I realized back then that if we don't move fast enough, if in half a year we don't have all these weapons, if we don't have all these immediate sharp sanctions on Russia, there will be something else. There will be other events in the world that will take attention from Ukraine. People will start getting tired. Refugees who would come here to Europe, who were so much welcomed, after some times would not be welcomed anymore because of the tiredness and psychological. Like, people cannot keep on living in psychological state of alert all the time. They have to keep adapting to the situation and explaining themselves why this is normal. So I sort of imagined that it could last so long. And I imagined that the longer it lasts, the less chances we have to win this war.
And that's an interesting point because, of course, if you look back at this week, it's now entered its 5th year, but there was very little momentum, if you like, this week. There was no US president in Kyiv this week. We saw, of course, Ursula von der Leyen was there, Antonio Costa on behalf of the EU, but nobody else. Katerina.
You mentioned an important point. The meeting in Kyiv was supposed to be about signaling European support. But then just before the meeting, we learned that Hungary was going to block the 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine. That decision should have been a formality. It was agreed upon before. And then last minute, Orban decided to stall. So that obviously undercut the message that the European leaders were wanting to send.
And that leaves Ukraine in a very tricky place. Sasha, you've been reporting on this day in, day out. I mean, you've been reporting on the political talks as well, or the peace talks, and also then on this financial issue. Will they get it solved, do you think?
I think the Europeans in this case are in a very tricky impasse because, as Katerina said, this is something that they have already agreed upon. That's something that they have already promised. And mind you, the decision regarding the loan in December was not an easy one. That was not a plan A, not even plan B. They had to really find a way around to make that happen. You remember everything, how the summit, the dramatic summit in December here in Brussels. And the fact that they have to go to Kyiv on the anniversary of the full-scale invasion, empty-handed, with double veto on the loan and on the new package of sanctions, this actually looked kind of worse for the EU leaders than it did for Ukrainian leadership.
Well, we can actually take a listen to President Zelensky as he was speaking in Kyiv earlier this week alongside the EU Council President Antonio Costa and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen.
We count on strong support from EU leaders and presidents of Commission and Council. So we're really proud that we have such relations. We count on the next package of sanctions, especially Russian shadow fleet to stop their tankers. And of course, we count on not to have too much challenges with 90 billion.
And Martha, how are Ukrainians doing? Are you seeing fatigue or are you seeing resilience?
The heroism of Ukrainians that everyone talked about in 2022 is actually living the everyday life in dignity, despite the bombs, despite the funerals, despite the abductions that are happening. And Ukrainians are, I would say, their resilience that people abroad admire. I think Ukrainians don't realize themselves that they are that resilient. But the thing how they are coping, the mechanism they are coping, they are creating communities of veterans who are helping each other, communities of families of the fallen who are helping each other, communities of families of the abducted children or abducted prisoners of war who are coming here to campaign for their release, who are helping each other psychologically as well. So this is the whole Ukraine is now is living in activism, not only on the front line, but also in the mode of activism in order to help each other to cope with the situation and to not lose. And Ukrainians are not going, we are not going to give up. If someone believes that there are peace talks and there will be peace without justice, we want justice. And peace without justice is just an intermission and just a preparation for the next attack. So justice, Ukrainians want justice. And actually the European integration of Ukraine, and that's what the Ukraine, why it all started for Ukrainians, would be some sort of remedy.
Well, your patience is admirable because, of course, this week we saw two very negative messages sent to Kyiv. The first was, I'm sorry, we don't have the 90 billion loan yet, even though Ursula von der Leyen in Kyiv did stress that there were other options on the table. And second, when it came to the EU membership point, she said we cannot put a date, but Zelensky wanted to put a date. Katerina, what is your take here?
Actually, the EU faces a dual task here because the two vetoes raise two different broader questions. The veto on the money says we got to ask ourselves, how do we take decisions on a European level when it comes to security matters? Are we efficient enough? Are we fast enough? Can we guarantee your unity? Apparently not. So the fact that reform of European decision-making, the debate has been revived. And then on the other hand, the enlargement issue, we are seeing that enlargement is once again a geopolitical issue because of the war. But it's a difficult question because everything is connected with everything. And if we cannot solve the one problem of how do we guarantee internal unity, the other question cannot be tackled either.
And Sasha, just on the peace talks, I mean, Sasha and I you can catch us very early in the morning on Euronews many days of the week, Monday to Friday, reporting constantly about the peace talks, the US-led peace talks. Where are we at here? Every morning we're asking you, what are the expectations for today? Will we see an impasse soon?
And almost every time I'm telling you that the most positive thing about it is the fact that the negotiations are actually taking place. And I think we should take it at this face value. Indeed, another round this week. But here is a tricky one. And I'm going to circle a little bit back towards the point of the EU enlargement here as well. Volodymyr Zelensky spoke with President Trump the evening before the latest round of talks in Geneva. And reportedly, the two exchanged their view on when would it be possible and preferable to put an end to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And this is when Zelensky reportedly said that he would like to see that within 1 year, so during this year, and Trump said within 1 month. We have already heard a couple of times the deadlines and the timelines from the US president, but let's take these 2, a year and a month. Let's imagine, how do we proceed in this case? If there is a meeting between the 3 presidents, between Donald Trump, Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, and let's say there is certain agreement. EU membership is part of the EU security guarantees for Ukraine, separately from the US security guarantees for Ukraine, in which case, should there be some sort of an agreement or the 3 sides getting closer to the agreement, what is going to happen with the EU membership of Ukraine? Would that mean if the date and if there is no commitment and it's impossible to put the date on it, right? As the president of the Commission said, but should there be an agreement on the political side on putting an end to the war? Does that mean the end to the war would be postponed until there is progress on the membership to the European Union?
Yeah, this highlights the problem of Europe not having a proper seat at the table here, because obviously it's an issue for the EU. And Trump is not a neutral negotiator here. I mean, just recently, the United States administration has communicated to Ukraine that in choosing their targets in Russia, they should be careful not to hurt American interests. And this goes to show that European and American interests in this matter are probably not always aligned.
And Martha, what is your view there? Because, of course, the Americans don't really understand. They're not mindful of the fact that Ukraine cannot budge on their red lines. They cannot concede territory.
That's really a good question. Like 1 year, I was also asked the question about why Trump is doing all these moves. One day, yes, another day, no. I believe it's a chaos that is being controlled by him. It's a very good strategy of chaos, and we cannot predict it. The only way for us and for Europe, like seeing that the world is falling out of this legal order and is falling into the order of force, the international order of force, but Europe cannot afford it. And Ukraine cannot afford it. We fight for the rule of law. We fight for the liberal values. That is what is happening in the world. It is not what we fight for. So I believe that Europe has to be independent enough to have its own way of achieving its what it calls European way of life and achieving that dignity that we fight for, and Europe already forgot what it is.
And how is the situation on the battleground? How is the morale of the soldiers?
It's the soldiers are holding on, but let me remind you that people keep falling. People keep dying. People keep getting injured, heavy injuries. They cannot go back to the front line. We are losing people who can fight back, and we don't have enough people to keep on doing that for many, many more years. The morale depends on that as well. Losing friends, losing people who see that, for them it's very hard, but that's why they don't want to give up. That's why they want more. They want more. They keep saying, give us more weapons. They are going to stand till the end.
And Sasha, just from your perspective as a political correspondent, do you think the EU has done enough to help Ukraine?
I think the European Union has done a lot. And I also feel like even the EU itself wishes it could do more, genuinely. But there are some hurdles, some political issues, nuances, vetoes on some occasions, which is very frustrating, not just for Ukraine, but also for the European Union, for Brussels. Every summit, every decision-making these days regarding Ukraine or also anything else is turning into a very, very complicating process, isn't it? It doesn't feel like anything's going to be changing anytime soon regarding this decision-making process within the European Union. And this is why, again, the question about all of the members, the unanimity and so on are rising now, because this is not really sustainable.
Yeah, and that's why the European Commissioner for Defense has proposed a European Security Council to be able to take decisions faster in that area. That's why, for example, the Green MP Sergei Lagodinsky has written a proposal with a blueprint for such a council, because everyone feels the need for change.
Indeed. And on that need for change, a slightly optimistic conclusion, we can bring this conversation to an end. A warm thank you to my guests this episode. Thank you so much, Katharina Emmersman, the head of EU International Politics at the Heinrich Böll Stiftung. And also to Marta. Thank you so much, founding president there of Promote Ukraine. And our Sasha Vakalina, Ukraine correspondent for here at Euronews. And also a big thank you to our sound technician, Georgos Levaditis. We have our Brussels My Love podcast producer, Alice Carnivali, and also thank you to our social media aide, Rebecca Spinzano. If you're not already, you can listen to this series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on euronews.com or Euronews' YouTube channel. And if you like what you hear, subscribe to Brussels My Love, the podcast, leave us a review, give us a rating, and of course, spread the word about Brussels My Love, the podcast. See you soon.